Even glued some hair on my chest.
Wow, that's more than what I got.
When you think of sitcoms from the 70s and 80s, you might picture laugh tracks, corny jokes, and families who always solved their problems in 22 minutes. Most people believe these shows were simple and safe entertainment. Hidden beneath the laughter, many of these shows were groundbreaking, daring, and, for their time, incredibly controversial. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on 20 sitcoms that were not afraid to push the envelope. 1. All in the Family.
You're wonderful.
You don't have to tell me that.
I wanted to tell you before it's too late.
Let's start with the undisputed king of controversial comedies, All in the Family. The show, which first aired in 1971, introduced the world to the Bunker family. At the center of it all was Archie Bunker, a loud-mouthed, prejudiced, and shockingly ignorant man from Queens, New York. Living with him was his sweet but simple wife Edith, his forward-thinking daughter Gloria, and his liberal son-in-law, Mike, who Archie lovingly called Meathead. The show's humor came from the constant arguments between Archie and his family over the hot-button issues of the day. But here is where the show broke all the rules. Archie was not just a grumpy old man. He used language and expressed ideas that had never been heard on television before. He used slurs and stereotypes that made audiences gasp. The creator, Norman Lear, said his goal was to make fun of prejudice by showing how ridiculous it was. But many people did not see it that way. The network, CBS, was so nervous that they hired extra operators to handle the flood of angry phone calls they expected after the first episode. They worried the show was promoting the very thing it was trying to criticize. The biggest firestorm, however, came from a two-part episode in 1977 called Edith's 50th Birthday. In this incredibly dark storyline, Edith is home alone when a man comes to the door and forces his way in, leading to a terrifying assault. Showing such a violent and serious event in a sitcom, complete with a laugh track and other scenes, was unheard of. Viewers were horrified and deeply disturbed. It was a moment that proved All in the Family was more than just a comedy. It was a show that would go to uncomfortable places to reflect the dark realities of life. The show was a massive hit, but it was always walking a tightrope. From a son-in-law who was a thorn in Archie's side, our next show features a daughter who gave her entire community a headache with her outspoken views. 2. Maude.
And I used to sing that song way back in our sorority days when we were young and the dinosaurs ruled the earth.
If Archie Bunker was the face of old-fashioned prejudice, Maude Findlay was the face of the new, outspoken liberal woman. Maude was the first spin-off from All in the Family, starring the brilliant Bea Arthur as Edith's cousin. Maude was everything Archie hated. She was a feminist, she was on her fourth husband, and she was not afraid to speak her mind on any issue, no matter how sensitive. The show was smart, funny, and from the very beginning, it was designed to get people talking. The show tackled all sorts of issues, from politics to mental health, but one storyline in 1972 caused a national uproar and became one of the most controversial moments in TV history. In a two-part episode called Maude's Dilemma, Maude, who was 47 years old, discovers that she is unexpectedly pregnant. After a lot of soul-searching and talking with her husband, Maude decides to make a very personal and difficult choice for herself and her family. This was happening right around the time the country was fiercely debating this very issue. The backlash was immediate and massive. The network received nearly 20,000 letters of protest. Religious groups and conservative organizations called for boycotts of the show and its sponsors. Several local TV stations across the country refused to air the episodes. On the other hand, groups that supported women's rights praised the show for its bravery and for showing a woman making a thoughtful and responsible choice. The controversy was so huge that it cemented the show's reputation as one of the most daring comedies on the air. It was a show that proved a woman's personal life could be the subject of serious and very public debate. Maude's personal choice caused a firestorm. But our next show made controversy its main ingredient, throwing every taboo topic into a blender and hitting puree. 3. Soap.
I like it, so I ain't making it. I'm making fish.
Mr. Tate hates fish.
I know.
Imagine taking a daytime soap opera with all its crazy plot twists and dramatic secrets and turning it into a half-hour comedy for prime time. That was the wild and brilliant idea behind the show Soap. The series followed the lives of two sisters and their completely dysfunctional families, the rich Tates and the working-class Campbells. Over its 4 seasons, the show included storylines about amnesia, alien abductions, and people coming back from the dead. But it was the show's humor about adult topics that really got it into hot water. Even before the first episode aired in 1977, Soap was already one of the most controversial shows in history. A magazine had published an article leaking the show's over-the-top storylines, and the public outcry was enormous. The network, ABC, reportedly received more than 32,000 letters of complaint from people who had not even seen the show yet. They were angry about its light-hearted treatment of infidelity, crime, and especially its inclusion of a major gay character, Jody Dallas, played by a young Billy Crystal. Jody was one of the first recurring gay characters on American television. While it was a big step for representation, the portrayal was complicated. Jody was often shown as confused and unhappy, which drew criticism from gay rights activists. At the same time, religious and conservative groups were furious that a gay character was on TV at all. The controversy never really went away. The show was constantly fighting with censors, and some sponsors pulled their ads. It was a series that lived on the edge, using outrageous comedy to explore the messy, complicated, and often secret lives that people lead. Soap made headlines by putting a gay character front and center. Our next show also dealt with social progress, but this time through the eyes of a black family who were moving on up. 4. The Jeffersons.
He slammed me down to the chair and I bounced all the way out into the kitchen.
Another hugely successful spin-off from All in the Family, the Jeffersons took the Bunker's next-door neighbors, George and Louise Jefferson, and gave them a whole new life. Thanks to his successful dry-cleaning business, George Jefferson moved his family from Queens to a deluxe apartment on the east side of Manhattan. The show, which ran for an incredible 11 seasons, was celebrated for being one of the first to feature a successful and affluent black family at its center. It was a powerful and positive image for millions of viewers. But, like its parent show, The Jeffersons was not afraid of a little controversy. The show's main source of conflict came from its main character. George Jefferson, played by the hilarious Sherman Hemsley, was in many ways a black version of Archie Bunker. He was a proud, loud-mouthed, and often prejudiced man. He was suspicious of his new white neighbors and was not shy about his distrust. He often made jokes at their expense and was particularly hostile toward his neighbors, the Willises, who were an interracial couple. This was the show's most surprising and controversial element. Here was a series celebrating black success, yet its hero often expressed his own forms of bigotry. George would refer to the Willises with insulting names and constantly questioned their relationship. For some viewers, this was a brilliant way to show that prejudice can exist in anyone, regardless of their background. It was a commentary on how people who have been oppressed can sometimes adopt the same negative attitudes. For others, it was uncomfortable and confusing. They felt the show was watering down the seriousness of prejudice by making George's comments the punchline of a joke. George Jefferson's sharp tongue often got him into trouble. Our next sitcom hero was also a working-class guy with a lot to say, but his controversies came from a much grittier place. 5. Sanford and Son.
Fire, or just another play. I hit it one more time for you. Am I the fire?
In 1972, television audiences were introduced to one of the most memorable characters in sitcom history, Fred G. Sanford. Played by the legendary comedian Red Fox, Fred was a grumpy, scheming, and hilarious junk dealer living in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles. His son, Lamont, was the long-suffering voice of reason who was constantly trying to rein in his father's wild ideas and fake heart attacks. The show was a massive hit, celebrated for its sharp writing and for bringing a truly unique and authentic voice to television. Red Fox was already a famous stand-up comedian known for his very adult and blue humor. A lot of the controversy around Sanford and Son came from just how much of that edgy persona he was able to bring to network TV. Fred Sanford was not a warm and cuddly father figure. He was greedy, insulting, and he hurled insults at everyone around him, including his sister-in-law, Aunt Esther, who he often compared to an animal. Their verbal sparring was legendary, but the language was often mean-spirited in a way that shocked some viewers. Furthermore, the show, like All in the Family, used racial humor in a way that made some people uncomfortable. Fred often made jokes about his own race and the races of others, including his Puerto Rican neighbor, Julio. The show's defenders argued that this was just realistic humor that reflected how people in that community actually talked. It was a way of laughing at stereotypes to take away their power. But critics felt that it was just reinforcing those same negative stereotypes for a national audience. It was a show that pushed the boundaries of what a family sitcom could sound like. Fred Sanford was always trying to get out of work. Our next show was about people trying to get ahead in life, but its biggest controversy came from how it treated its female characters. 6. Three's Company.
It does. Don't be nervous. Me? Nervous? When I cook, nothing bothers me.
When Three's Company premiered in 1977, it was an instant sensation. The premise was simple and, for the time, very risque. Two single women, Janet and Chrissy, need a third roommate for their Santa Monica apartment. They find the perfect person, a culinary student named Jack Tripper, played by the brilliant John Ritter. There is just one problem. Their grumpy landlord, Mr. Roper, will not allow single men and women to live together. So, they come up with a plan. They tell Mr. Roper that Jack is gay, and he reluctantly agrees. This simple misunderstanding was the engine for years of hilarious and farcical comedy, full of slapstick and innuendo. But it was also the source of endless controversy. The show was constantly criticized by two very different groups for two very different reasons. On one side, religious groups and family advocates were outraged by the show's content. They saw it as a weekly parade of adult themes and suggestive humor, all centered around the idea of three attractive young people living together. They felt it was promoting a loose lifestyle. On the other side, feminists and critics took issue with the show's portrayal of its female characters, particularly Chrissy, played by Suzanne Summers. Chrissy was written as the stereotypical dumb blonde, a character who was often clueless and childlike. Her character was also frequently put in situations that emphasized her physical appearance. Critics argued that the show was objectifying its female stars and relying on sexist tropes for cheap laughs. Despite the constant criticism from all sides, the show was a ratings giant, proving that a little controversy could be very popular. The comedy in Three's Company came from a lie. But the comedy in our next show came from a very real and very serious place, a family struggling to make ends meet in the inner city. 7. Good Times.
Why can't I run my own life?
Tell me what you're talking about. You're free to do anything you want to do, as long as you check with me and your mother first.
Another classic sitcom from the mind of Norman Lear, Good Times, was a spin-off of Maude. It centered on the Evans family, who lived in a public housing project in Chicago. The show followed the loving but constantly struggling parents, Florida and James Evans, and their three children, J.J., Thelma, and Michael. Good Times was praised for its realistic and dignified portrayal of a working-class black family dealing with issues like poverty, unemployment, and raising children in a tough environment. The controversy with Good Times was complex and came from inside the show itself. The breakout star of the series was Jimmy Walker, who played the oldest son, JJJ. JJ was known for his goofy behavior, his love of painting, and his catchphrase, DYNOMITE. He was a huge hit with audiences and quickly became the most popular character on the show. However, the show's main actors, Esther Roll, who played Florida, and John Amos, who played James, grew to dislike the direction the character was going. They felt that JJ had become a cartoonish stereotype. They had signed on to do a show that realistically portrayed the struggles of a black family, but they felt it was turning into a silly comedy centered on a clownish character. They believed JJ was a poor role model for young black viewers. The tension on set became so bad that John Amos was eventually let go from the show, and his character James was written to have passed away in a car accident. Esther Roll also left for a time out of protest. It was a case where the show's incredible popularity created a deep and bitter conflict over its true message. The stars of Good Times worried about role models. Our next show also dealt with family, but it became controversial for putting its young stars in some surprisingly adult and scary situations. 8. Different Strokes.
Don't worry, she can't hurt us.
I'm not worried about us. I'm worried about me.
The premise of Different Strokes was a modern-day fairy tale. A rich, white, and kind-hearted Manhattan millionaire named Philip Drummond adopts the two young black sons of his late housekeeper. The two boys, Arnold and Willis, move from Harlem to a fancy Park Avenue penthouse, leading to all sorts of funny and heartwarming fish-out-of-water situations. The show was a massive hit, making child stars out of Gary Coleman, who played the adorable Arnold, and Todd Bridges, who played his older brother Willis. The show was known for its sweet-natured humor, but it was also famous for a certain type of episode that became its most controversial legacy. These were the very special episodes. In these episodes, the show would pause the comedy to tackle a very serious social issue. While the intentions were good, the results were often shocking, and for the young audience watching, sometimes terrifying. The most infamous of these was a two-part episode called The Bicycle Man. In this story, Arnold and his friend Dudley meet a friendly man who runs the local bike shop. He seems nice, but he is actually a predator who tries to lure the boys into a dangerous situation. The episode was meant to teach children about stranger danger, but its creepy tone and serious subject matter were extremely disturbing for a primetime family sitcom. Another episode dealt with the boys getting abducted while hitchhiking. Critics and parents debated whether a comedy show was the right place to explore these dark topics, with many feeling that the scary storylines were too intense for the show's young fans. Different Strokes brought dark topics to a family sitcom. Our next show was set in a dark place, a war zone, but it controversially used comedy to make a powerful statement. 9. MASH.
In case we're attacked by the Saracens.
Well, you have to do a tall appendectomy.
Based on a hit movie, the TV show MASH was set in a mobile army surgical hospital during the Korean War. It followed a team of brilliant and wisecracking doctors led by Hawkeye Pierce as they used humor and pranks to cope with the horrors of war. The show was a unique blend of comedy and drama, and it became one of the most beloved and acclaimed series in television history. Its final episode is still one of the most watched broadcasts of all time. The main controversy surrounding MASH was its very premise. While the show was officially set during the Korean War of the 1950s, it was actually a commentary on the Vietnam War, which was still happening when the show first aired in 1972. The show had a strong anti-war message. It showed the waste, the bureaucracy, and the terrible human cost of conflict. The doctors were constantly making fun of the military brass and questioning the reasons they were there. This did not sit well with everyone. Some viewers, particularly those who supported the military and the war in Vietnam, felt the show was disrespectful to the armed forces. They saw the characters' constant jokes and rule-breaking as unpatriotic. The show also pushed the boundaries of what a sitcom could be. It was not afraid to get serious. There were episodes where beloved characters passed away, and the doctors had to deal with the emotional toll of losing patients every day. In one of the most famous and shocking episodes, it is revealed that a character is dealing with an immense personal tragedy. It was a show that used laughter as a defense against tears, and that powerful mix made it both beloved and controversial. MASH found humor in a war. Our next show found humor in the culture clash of a big city cop moving to a small southern town, and it waded right into some very sensitive territory. 10. Married. With children.
I could really use some motherly advice right now.
Shut up, bud. Oprah is doing a show on mothers who don't pay attention to their sons.
In the mid-1980s, family sitcoms were dominated by sweet, wholesome shows like The Cosby Show and Family Ties. Then, in 1987, the brand new Fox network unleashed a show that was the complete opposite of all that. Married. With children introduced the world to the Bundy family. There was Al, the miserable shoe salesman who hated his life, his wife Peggy, who refused to cook or clean, their ditzy daughter Kelly, and their scheming son, Bud. The Bundys were rude, crude, and constantly insulting each other. The show was a deliberate attack on the perfect families seen on other networks, and it was controversial from day one. The humor was mean-spirited and often focused on Al Bundy's misery and his complete lack of affection for his family. The show was full of jokes about Peggy's spending habits, Kelly's promiscuity, and the family's overall trashiness. It was unlike anything else on television, and it quickly developed a reputation for being vulgar and offensive. The biggest controversy came in 1989 when a woman from Michigan named Terry Rakolta started a letter-writing campaign to get the show taken off the air. She was offended by an episode that featured images of an old man in a garter belt and other suggestive content. She wrote to the show's sponsors, urging them to pull their advertising. The campaign blew up and became a national news story. Some companies did pull their ads, but the controversy had an unintended effect. The publicity made more people curious about the show, and its ratings actually went up. The show leaned into its bad reputation and ran for 11 seasons, forever changing the rules about how a family could be portrayed on television. The Bundys were famous for being a dysfunctional family. Our next show also featured a family, but its controversy came from a surprisingly bold decision to include a same-gender couple as parents. 11. Roseanne Long.
I got no privacy. I can't even make my Maxwell house naked like God intended.
Modern revival, the original run of Roseanne was one of the most important and groundbreaking sitcoms of the late 80s and 90s. The show was revolutionary for its realistic portrayal of a working-class family, the Connors. Roseanne and Dan were overweight, they struggled to pay their bills, and their house was messy. They talked and acted like a real family, and America loved them for it. The show was also fearless in tackling social issues. Roseanne dealt with everything from money problems to feminism, but it was most famous for its positive and matter-of-fact portrayal of gay characters. Roseanne's boss at the restaurant was gay, and her friend Nancy was a lesbian. These characters were not treated as punchlines, they were just part of the show's world. But the show created a huge controversy in 1994 with an episode called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In the episode, Roseanne and her sister Jackie go to a new themed bar, and Roseanne is surprised to see her friend Nancy there. She is even more surprised when Nancy's new girlfriend, played by actress Mariel Hemingway, gives Roseanne a kiss. It was one of the first same-gender kisses between two women on a network sitcom. The network, ABC, was incredibly nervous. They threatened not to air the episode. The show's producers had to fight hard to keep the kiss in. When it finally aired, some sponsors pulled out, and some local stations refused to show it. It was a moment that pushed the boundaries of what was considered family-friendly television and was a major step forward for LGBTQ representation. Roseanne broke ground with a kiss. Our next sitcom featured 4 older women who broke ground simply by talking honestly about their lives, and it made them icons. 12. The Golden Girls.
My car will last another year.
All right, Dorothy. I see behind that mask. You're angry.
When The Golden Girls premiered in 1985, the idea of a sitcom centered on 4 single, older women living together in Miami was considered a huge risk. But the show, starring 4 legendary actresses, Bea Arthur, Betty White, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty, was an instant smash hit. The brilliant writing and perfect chemistry of the cast made Dorothy, Rose, Blanche, and Sophia household names. The show was hilarious, but it was also surprisingly deep and progressive. The controversy around The Golden Girls was a quiet but constant hum. The show's main offense was that it allowed its senior characters to have active, complicated, and vibrant lives. The 4 women dated, they talked openly about intimacy, and they dealt with real-world issues. Blanche Devereaux, in particular, was a character who was unapologetically confident in her desires, which was a revolutionary concept for a woman of her age on television. The show also tackled subjects that no other sitcom would touch at the time. In a very early episode, the women have to deal with the possibility that they may have been exposed to HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. This was at a time when there was a great deal of fear and misinformation surrounding the disease. The episode handled the topic with compassion and humanity. The show also featured gay characters, including Blanche's own brother, and dealt with issues like Social Security, healthcare, and the fear of aging. It was a show that insisted on treating older women as full human beings, and that simple act was, in its own way, a quiet rebellion. The Golden Girls showed that older women had stories to tell. Our next sitcom was also about friendship, but its controversial premise involved 2 men pretending to be women. 13. Bosom Buddies.
You talking to me? You talking to me? I don't see anybody else here. You must be talking to me.
I'm talking to you, mister.
Before he was a 2-time Oscar winner and one of the most beloved movie stars in the world, Tom Hanks was the star of a goofy sitcom with a very silly and very controversial premise. On Bosom Buddies, which debuted in 1980, Hanks and his co-star Peter Scolari played 2 young ad men named Kip and Henry. They get kicked out of their apartment and are desperate for a place to live. They find the perfect spot, a cheap apartment in a hotel for women. There is just one catch. It is for women only. Their solution? They put on dresses, wigs, and makeup and pretend to be women named Buffy and Hildy. This cross-dressing premise was the source of all the show's humor. The comedy came from the 2 men trying to keep their secret from their female neighbors and their boss while navigating the world from a woman's perspective. The show was lighthearted and fun, but the very idea of it was controversial for the time. Critics and some viewers felt the show was making fun of people who cross-dress and was insensitive to the transgender community, even though that was not a widely discussed topic at the time. The humor was based on stereotypes about men and women, and the whole concept was seen by some as being in poor taste. The show was never a huge ratings hit and only lasted for 2 seasons. But its controversial premise and the fact that it launched the career of the great Tom Hanks has made it a memorable piece of television history. It is a reminder of a time when a silly idea for a sitcom could still be seen as a bit dangerous. Bosom Buddies got laughs from a secret identity. Our next show also had a secret, but it was a much darker one involving a crime that was rarely, if ever, talked about on TV. 14. Too Close for Comfort.
Why did they throw you out of the home? What happened? happened this time?
I haven't the slightest idea.
Too Close for Comfort was a family sitcom that starred Ted Knight, famous for his role on The Mary Tyler Moore Show as a cartoonist named Henry Rush. Henry was the loving but overprotective father of 2 adult daughters who lived in the apartment downstairs from him and his wife. The show's humor came from Henry's constant worrying and his meddling in his daughters' lives. For the most part, it was a standard, light-hearted family comedy. But in 1982, the show aired an episode that was so shocking and so far removed from its usual tone that it is rarely ever seen in reruns today. The episode was called For Every Man, There's 2 Women. The story involved one of Henry's daughters, Jackie, bringing a male friend home who was very distraught. It is eventually revealed that the man was the victim of a serious assault by 2 women. The very idea of tackling this subject on a sitcom was unbelievable. But what made it truly controversial was how the show handled it. The situation was played at times for laughs. The studio audience can be heard laughing at the man's story. The episode treated a deeply serious and traumatic event with a bizarrely light tone. It was a stunningly tone-deaf moment that left viewers confused and offended. It is a powerful example of a show trying to be relevant by tackling a tough issue, but failing completely to understand the gravity of the situation, resulting in one of the most cringeworthy and controversial episodes of the entire decade. That episode was a shocking misstep, but other shows of the era also tried to tackle tough issues, including another family sitcom that dealt with a health crisis that was terrifying the nation. 15. Mr. Belvedere.
And you gave that to your poor old mother.
Yeah, you laugh, but that's what made me what I am today.
Here is another family sitcom from the 80s that, on the surface, seemed perfectly sweet and harmless. Mr. Belvedere was about a proper and witty British butler who takes a job as a housekeeper for a chaotic American family, the Owenses, in suburban Pittsburgh. The humor came from the clash of cultures between the sophisticated Mr. Belvedere and the down-to-earth family. Each episode ended with Mr. Belvedere writing in his journal, reflecting on the lessons he had learned that day. Like Different Strokes, this show was not afraid to get very serious. It became known for its very special episodes that dealt with surprisingly heavy topics. There was an episode that dealt with teen pregnancy, and another that tackled the issue of homelessness. But the most controversial and memorable of these episodes aired in 1989. It was called Wesley's Friend, and it was one of the first times a primetime family show ever dealt with the topic of AIDS. In the episode, the youngest son Wesley's best friend, a boy named Danny, is revealed to be HIV positive after receiving a blood transfusion. The news causes panic in the community. Parents do not want their children playing with Danny, and there is a lot of fear and misinformation. The episode was designed to teach viewers about the disease and to combat the prejudice that people with AIDS were facing. At a time when the AIDS crisis was a major source of fear and public debate, it was a remarkably brave and compassionate storyline for a family sitcom. Still, the subject matter was so intense that it was considered highly controversial for a show watched by children.